Good morning, world historians. Dr. Smith here again. This is week 4 of our History 198, World History 1500 to the present day. And today we're going to be talking about the crisis of the European global order 1914 to 1945. So our bookends are World War One, World War Two. Now, I think it's intentional that we talk about the crisis of a European world order, even though this is a global history class, because of course the First World War that began in 1914, at least in Europe in 1914, and which drew America in 1917, was essentially a conflict of European empires. And in fact, it led to the downfall of 4 major world empires, the First World War, of which 3 were European. Now, the one arguably that was not European, although it included territory in Europe, was the Ottoman Empire, which was probably the oldest of the empires, stretching all the way back to the 14th century. But that was in Turkey, the Middle East. So what happens after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire? The Ottomans, if you like, backed the wrong horse during World War One, and their territories in the Middle East are partitioned. Many historians today will say not only do the borders of the Middle East today date back essentially to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War One, but many of the problems facing the Middle East today also stem from that period. So the sort of lack of resolution over land issues in the Middle East can be traced back to that period. The other 3 empires which came apart as a result of the First World War would have been the Habsburg Empire. That was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was the other medieval empire that had lasted all the way from the pre-Renaissance times to the First World War, and where the First World War actually begins. And the other empires would be the German Empire, particularly the House of Hohenzollern, which was the house of the last Kaiser of Germany. That was overthrown at the end of the First World War. And I think most interestingly, the Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for 300 years, would be overthrown in 1917, actually before the end of the First World War, by the Bolshevik Party in Russia, which were the Russian communist hardliners led by Vladimir Lenin. So we're going to talk and read a little bit about the Russian Revolution in this week's class. So what we're going to be focusing on this week are causes of the First and Second World War. I'm sure we all know, for example, how the United States was drawn into the Second World War on December 7th, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor, which President Roosevelt called a day which will live in infamy. However, I think few people in the United States necessarily are aware of the causes that led this country into the First World War in 1917. But it's important to realize that the war had been going on for 3 years before that. So we talk about the causes of the First World War, the Great War as it was called at the time, and the Second World War. We also put it into a little bit of context surrounding empire, imperial relationships, conflicts that led to the First World War. And in some ways can also be seen as reflected in the Second World War. The Second World War really brings about the decline, or the final nail in the coffin, rather, of the traditional European empires, such as the British and French empires in Africa and Asia, although they would hang on for a little bit after the Second World War. But what, of course, replaces that is the great power rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, what we fondly call today the First Cold War. So that was obviously kind of towards the end of this unit. We'll talk about how the United States and the Soviet Union went from being allies during the Second World War to adversaries at the end of the war. Also talking about the major ideological divisions in the world at the beginning of the 20th century. And those are really threefold if we think of the previous century, the 19th century, as being a time of rising nationalism and imperialism, and to some extent the beginnings of socialism. That ideology will have solidified by the 20th century into Soviet-style communism. That would be one of the three major ideologies of the first half of the 20th century. The others would be, of course, fascism, which was most extremely articulated by the Third Reich of Nazi Germany, but which was effectively destroyed in World War II. And then finally, what is sometimes referred to as liberal democracy. Now, don't get sidetracked by the word liberal. We're not talking here in the rather narrow sense that Americans use the word liberal as a counterpoint to conservative. But the term liberal in this sense, or the phrase liberal democracy, refers to a number of characteristics, including the rule of law, free markets, popular participation in politics through the medium of elections, which were presumed to be free and fair, and separation of the powers of government. Now, this is, again, perhaps mistakenly thought to be the dominant ideology at the end of the Cold War, but which has somewhat come under pressure from other ideologies which have emerged in the 21st century, and we're talking here about particularly some of the hardline ideologies such as ISIS in the Middle East, but also the communist style of Chinese capitalist communism, if you like, which developed in the second half of the 20th century, and which really developed in the 21st century to challenge the United States hegemony of the world that was established at the end of the First Cold War, the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union's demise in 1991. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there. So just a quick reminder, midterm exams are due today. I know there's been some issues with technology, so I'll update you if there's any issues with the Turnitin. But the midterm exam is just a one essay. I think there are 3 essay prompts, but the questions are randomized. So that's due by the end of today. So don't leave it till midnight. So Monday, July 22nd. I also have another video to view for Module 4 discussion, which is the Fallen of the Second World War. It's an infographic video which looks at the terrible human toll of the Second World War, the deadliest war in human history, a war that probably claimed the lives of at least 70 million people worldwide, and tries to put that into some sort of historical context, world historical context. So if you can watch the video for that assignment, do the discussion forum as you've been doing, and then turn in the midterm exam that's due by the end of today. And if you have any questions, or end of Monday, I should say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, SmithMD6, at miamioh.edu. Thanks very much.